Hello, everyone. There's no free dinner either. I am Sebastian Ortiz. I am joined by Dr. Minelli. On the first episode with Dr. Fleischer, I discussed the work of Thomas Sass. I actually didn't discuss it. I just said that he was my favorite psychiatrist. If you didn't understand the inside joke, you would have someone would have you believe that I go to psychiatrists. I would never spend my money like that. And that is based on the information that Professor Emeritus of Psychiatry, Thomas Sass, the late Thomas Sass, published in many of his books. The general argument being that there's a difference between neuropathy and what people call mental illness, which is just the diverse differences in behavior that you can observe in humans. Whereas you can see damage to the tissue of the central nervous system in the case of neuropathy. In the case of mental illness, what people call crazy is just behavior that is different from cultural expectations. And from a natural law standpoint, the only thing that matters is, does this entail a violation of the non-aggression principle? Are you attacking someone or their property? Or, to put it in statist terms, has someone committed a crime or not? And it turns out that under the current psychiatric branch of the state, the medical branch of the state called psychiatry, what you find indeed is people who have committed crimes getting ameliorated sentences based on the insanity defense, or people who have not committed any crime against anyone being kidnapped and caged under the pretense that they are a danger to society. And so I wanted to have Dr. Minelli, who is a medical doctor, has first-hand experience of the psychiatric guild, and is also very well read, even better than I am, in the works of the late Thomas Sass. He is an hotelier. He owns a hotel, the famous Notary Hotel in Bruges, Belgium, where I had the honor of presenting my book last year with Andre Ramirez, Why Did I Kill Him? The End of the State of Law, and where you can find suites named after great scholars and libertarian natural law thinkers. Welcome to No Free Dinner Either, and I would like you to present yourself and then give us a general outline of, one, your experience with the psychiatric industry, and two, your general perspective on human psychology.
Well, my name is Marnik Minelli. I've been a medical doctor now for 2 years. Um, I've had 1 year of experience in the Netherlands working as a psychiatrist in training. Um, but I don't know if this is giving me a different view of the matter, because I think my view is mostly based on praxeology and consequences of that, rather than experience. But um, what I've experienced in practice is a kind of brave new world mentality in the profession of psychology and psychiatry, where there is no free will, there is no morality, there is no valuations. The only thing that is really a standard of a measure is happiness versus unhappiness. This really reminds one of Aldous Huxley's Brave New World, in the sense that um, uh, there is, if you're too happy, you have to give something that lowers you a bit down, and if you're too sad, you need to get something that gets you up. It really doesn't matter if it's pharmacological or if it is so-called psychotherapeutical. Also a term which requires a lot of imagination in order for it to really, be a valid, not valid, but a term with meaning. What are you therapeuticizing when you are treating mental illness, when you cannot even show it, like you have said. I think if I have to make a short synopsis of my own view, um, it would be that, like I said, it would derive most of its conclusions from the praxeological uh, uh, um, axiom, yeah, the axiom of human action, that persons act and they use means to achieve ends. They act purposefully, and in order to do so, they must choose. Yeah, and to choose, one ought to have values. Why do you choose this? It's not per se that one has to have good reasons, but one at least has to value the one thing above the other in order to be able to choose this one thing and not this other thing. And uh, one to argue against this, it would lead into a performative contradiction.
So if you said, no, I don't have to have an order of preferences of the things that I value, by doing that, you are expressing a preference and contradicting yourself.
Exactly. Why not? Why not shut up? Why not walk away? Why not? There's many things one can do uh, uh, apart from trying to disprove what I just said. But if one chooses to do so and try to say, I'm not valuing this above that. I'm not acting purposefully. I'm not having this valuation in order to choose. Yes, then it would be a performative contradiction, as one can say. And then I, of course, admit that psychologically speaking, there are factors that influence these valuations. uh, what Mises would call etymology, derived from the soul or desire or spirit. Where does it come from that you desire this and not that? Um, it might be something that you were born with, an inclination, or culture where you grew up in, or whatever happened to you, yeah, your past. And so I'm not saying that you are you are purely reasonable, and there's not, and you just choose whatever you want to value, and I can value whatever I want. um, uh, I think that you can have control, somewhat control over it, or you can. If I want an ice cream right now, I can decide. No, I'm not going to take I'm not going to buy an ice cream. I'm not going to eat an ice cream. I think you can exert some control, um, and so in that sense, I'm of course saying that people are rational in the sense that you can conceptualize and rationalize. You can um, you have something more than just the impulse, and you're not caused. That is very important, um, um, because I think mainstream psychiatry, mainstream psychology um, tries to, when they talk about treatment and when they talk about helping somebody, they really focus on these thymological factors. That these they really want to make it easier for you to to choose the right thing, and not that they believe that there is a right choice, but they do want to change your behavior, and they want to make it easy for you to change your behavior. Or and so what they do is they try to give you they try to speak with you, or they try to do EMDR, or they give you some drugs in order for
What is EMDR for those in our audience that don't know?
basically you tell you tell all the things that you have experienced that traumatized you, or you that haunt you, let's say. And at the same time you're being distracted, and the distraction makes it that don't really have to think about what happened to you at the time, but you can say it. So it's a kind of deconditioning, right? It's like the trying to get the Pavlov dog to not salivate when the bell is chimed, and so you try to
So,
chime the bell to make it that there's no food involved, so that it's deconditioned from associating it with the food, and so you're saying all the bad things that happen to you, but you're distracted from really thinking about it, processing it, and feeling bad, and that's basically what EMDR does.
so it is
Um,
a way to prevent the so-called re-traumatization while still addressing its historical memory in the person who's telling it to you. Now, one thing that interests me a lot about what you mentioned is that it is definitely a trend, and a trend that has been criticized by thinkers such as Frank van Doon from Belgium, that there seems to be a reductionism in the perception of the psychiatric but also neuroscientific scientific industry of humans as machines, as if they are more or less determined by historical events that took place during their upbringing, and that these impulses and tendencies are latent, and their being unaware of it means that they don't have a true consciousness, so that they are to some extent partially determined. And of course, this is contrary to the traditional view of responsibility, of individual responsibility, which is, by the way, that of the criminal law, that you are responsible for the consequences of your actions.
um, I think it's a very important point. I have multiple things to say about that. Um, but I first want to say that I must reject what you're saying about traumatizing and re-traumatizing, because I do not actually think that situations do any traumatizing at all. I think it requires an evaluation of the person involved, and so what is more true is to say that you, by writing your story about whatever happened and what factually happened, by writing a story about what happened in your head, you are traumatizing yourself. That's what I'm saying. People write the stories that they want to write, or yeah, which they do that because it gives them something that they wouldn't have if they would have written it differently. It's a praxeological truth. Why not do something else? They chose it to remember it that way. They chose it to do it that way, and not another way. But it's very important what you said, that people are not caused, because what I'm what I think is most important is that even if it would be possible, which I think it is possible to really focus on etymological factors, and to give drugs, and to give psychotherapy, whatever it is, and to really change behavior. I do think it's possible, but I think it ought not to be done. You ought not to do it. It is like a bird could survive without using its wings too, in theory and in practice even. But it ought not to live that way. People
You
have.
think you think that this would be a practice that would be very ethically questionable from the standpoint of individual development and freedom?
Exactly. Exactly. I think a good life is a self-examined life. It is a life that where you really want to um, know what is good to do, to really, and for that you have to try and know the world. You have to try and know yourself. So of all the things, of all the ideas and the bad ideas, I think the least bad idea would be psychoanalysis, where you try to really understand your own constitution. You understand you try to really be honest with yourself. What do I desire? Maybe try to find out, why do I desire this? that what really happened to me, and then not only factual, like, oh, your father beat you or whatever, but also what kind of story did you create to in order to be able to live your life onwards from that point, which often these stories, you make yourself into a victim, because Jesus suffered, now I'm suffering, so I must also be a very moral character. It helps you to live the way you want to live and to see yourself in the way that you want to see yourself, but it's often a lie, right? And what mainstream psychologists and psychiatrists do, or rather what they do not do, is they do not really acknowledge this fact that people write their stories, that they are not actual victims, that they are not actually caused, they have their own volition still, and they lack most of all bravery. Maybe they lack knowledge about what the good is, but bravery and honesty with themselves, and motivation to really uh, go out there as an adult and experience the world as an adult rather than in a make believe world like a child. This is what I think is. And I'm not saying that I'm perfect. I don't know what is the good completely. I do think that people have some idea of what good is and what evil is, but I'm not saying that I have found it. But you really
I
want to
have
look at it. You really want
I
to
have to
look
make
at
a
it. Yeah.
I have to make a comment about that because you mentioned several subjects that seem to lead all to the question of once you have examined your past, once you have reflected on self knowledge, and you have asked yourself the question, what historical events in my past were influential in the narrative that I told myself about life, and once you acknowledge that you are free to make your choices for better or worse, then the question arises, and I would ask you to explain your perspective on this. What should I choose? What should I value? Beyond just preference, as you say, for the good life.
That's very difficult, and I'm a moral objectivist in the same sense as Rothbard was, but and I'm a metaphysical realist. So I believe that you have to look at reality and look at yourself. What are you? And so I truly believe that there is an ought derived from an is in that sense. Um, but so it is relative in a way, and not in a postmodern way, but in the way that it is like a white Caucasian person should use sunscreen, and a Negro person maybe shouldn't.
I have a question about that. So, what you're saying is that the integration of looking at reality will lead you to a degree of self knowledge that will at least enable you to determine what would be good for me to do. Not only, as you said in the beginning, about the psychiatric industry for the satisfaction of my preferences and desires and being happy or feeling content all the time, but more in the sense that if I am not a great runner, it probably is not the best idea that I try for the next 15 years to try to be admitted to compete Olympically. Something having to do with the acknowledgement of your limits and your talents, if I understand correctly.
Yes, I think this is a very obvious example. Um, uh, I think that it is a trick. It's not a trick question, but it's very difficult to answer it without falling into the trap of doing that which is most easy, to go and work for the state, uh, because they offer more a higher wage because they first rob you blind. Yes, that is something it's easy to do, and so, oh, look at reality. Oh, let's all go and work for the state. um, it's more than just what is easy and what you can achieve. I see that my phone is dying. Kan je die niet hebben? Kan je die?
So
Zet je
it's
het op?
so It is not only a matter of self-knowledge of your talents and your strengths and weaknesses and general tendencies, but also self-knowledge of the degree to which there are other persons in reality who may also have narratives that are not honest about what is going on, but that lead because of the general tendency to maximize value for yourself and minimize risk and cost, that lead to structures, to institutions that open the door to an easy path, but that easy path may not only make things more difficult for you individually, as a matter of fact, it might, as you mentioned, make it easier than having to take the risk of opening a business, registering it, going in and getting finance from a bank, and then offering a product, hiring people, renting a place. But it may actually put several people at risk of reinforcing their own self deception, if I'm not misunderstanding or misinterpreting.
I think it goes for everybody. That it's not per se because you earn a lot of money doing abortions with girls that got pregnant because they whatever didn't watch out, whatever. That you ought to do that. And if you are somebody who performs abortions, you're not really the person that people look up to in order to fashion their life after. I'm not saying that psychiatrists and psychologists are role models, but they ought to be. It's like they have the function of the priests that nobody believes anymore, and everybody believes in science. And now the psychologists and the psychiatrists have taken over the function of the priest. And of course, will you take advice from a priest who acts more immorally all of the time? You wouldn't. And so and so that's exactly what psychiatrists and psychologists do. What they focus on is exactly that. How can we make your life easier in order to increase the happiness level, whatever it may be. Um, and I think this you ought not to do that, and more so if you do that, and you're the psychologist or the psychiatrist who does that, then you're going contrary to what you ought to do, and you're dragging all of these clients of yours down with you. This is yeah.
So, if I understand correctly, what you say is that there is an ethical or moral limit to the practice of whatever it is that you do, which you should pay attention to, because after all, to some extent, you cannot just dive into hypocrisy where everything that you preach is just a means to get a transaction cleared between you and someone else, as a Pharisee who does not practice what they preach, but also out of a consideration. In the case of abortion, you talk about, I think that the value here is human life, but that there are ethical constraints to your own actions, so that you should ask yourself the question of what is the virtuous thing to do in whatever it is that I'm doing.
I think everybody ought to do it, and like I said, psychologists and psychiatrists even more so. And it sounds like it's an opinion. But I think one can find also very good philosophical reasons for that. Let's start with I can't understand how or what rather mainstream psychiatrists would speak about. Why? Because if they are truly so subjectivist, and they really believe that the road up is the road down, and they don't really have a direction of ethical standard, and they say that philosophically it isn't even possible. There is no such thing as goodness. Then what do they speak about? Um, why would you speak about this event and not that event? Why would you speak about this particular item? How many glasses of alcohol do you drink? That is just as relevant as how many steps you take in the park. Because I mean, what's the reason behind it that you would speak about the alcohol and not about the steps in the park? You have to have
Then,
some reason for that. And how can
then,
you?
then justification seems completely out of the window, and the only reason why you would be practicing psychology, as in the hypothetical example that you mentioned of the abortion clinic practitioner, let's call him that, would be for money. The only reason that would justify action on a professional setting would have nothing to do with a vocational aspect of adding value towards others. But as you say, then why are you practicing psychiatry or psychology and not a hitman? Is it just a matter of what pays more? What is the limit to saying there are no values, there is no right, there is no wrong, and everything is just a matter of opinions and what satisfies the preferences and happiness level from moment to moment of the person in question?
I think it's even worse because um, it is the easy path. It is much easier to be a psychologist than it is to be a hitman. Also, um, practicing psychology or psychiatry in this culture, in this day of and age, you are the moral hero. You are doing well. You are performing a mutual lie together with the patient. The patient tells himself he is a victim. You tell him he's sick. You're the helper. He's the one being helped, and status as a psychiatrist or psychologist is thereby massively increased. And so it's not only about the money. And the fact is that most of my colleagues, most of the people working in this field, they would have been great witch hunters. They really do. They really would, because they really would believe that these people who act a little bit weird, or who are smarter than the rest, or whatever it is that is so different and so hateful, that you hate so much. Uh, there must be something wrong with them. And at the time, witchcraft was seriously believed. Everybody seriously believed it, just like today everybody believes there is such a thing as mental illness. And so my colleagues would have been great witch hunters.
I am reminded, since you mentioned the issue of status, of the decade of 2010 through 2019, and how Stefan Molyneux, whose wife was a therapist, I believe it's a therapist, a psychotherapist, he set up a YouTube channel and he analyzed political events and gave lectures on philosophy, and he emphasized the coercive, aggressive nature of the state, how taxation is robbery based on intimidation, and he became very popular. Then, after a while, he was deplatformed from YouTube, and somewhere in between those two dates, there was an overlap where Jordan Peterson became the most famous Canadian thinker in the world. And of course, he is not an explicitly libertarian person who advocates radically that as long as you don't physically attack or invade other people's property, you should be able to more or less do as you want, and that everything else has to be modified accordingly. The institutions. And I thought this was highly disappointing, because there you did see a huge level of status that went from a YouTube entrepreneur, a pioneer, to someone who complied from the earliest on, getting a diploma, going through the ropes of getting a degree, getting a state approved license, and then being put into the status of a hero because he refused not tenure, not being in faculty, not adhering to the orthodox position of statism, but he refused to use the pronouns on the whole LGBTQ thing. If you contrast that with the case of Deidre McCloskey, that's the legal name currently. I don't go by legal fictions, but Deidre McCloskey is the current name. This was a libertarian economist who used to be Donald McCloskey, who was actually very postmodern and relativist, but who decided to escape the United States and come to the Netherlands after family decided to use the choices that were made by that person as an excuse to get them caged and incarcerated by having two members of the family plus a psychiatrist certify that this person who has never committed a felony, a crime, was a danger to the public. And it was all about the identity transformation, how they decided to present themselves to the world. Whereas Molyneux used to stress how taxation is theft, and not only is it theft, it helps troops and army personnel to go killing strangers who are not threatening anyone halfway across the globe. So when you mention status, it seems to me important to emphasize that not only are these people great inquisitors, as you mentioned, witch doctors, heretic doctors, heretic trial hunters, the people who would otherwise in a different century be burning people at the stake. But it seems to me that even as witch doctors, they fall short. I mean, I don't know what are the effects, the objective, technical outcomes that are the success stories of psychiatry and psychology. But without comparing them to the priests, let's compare them just to witch doctors and charlatans. It seems to me that the industry of psychiatry calls itself therapeutic in the way that it could call itself palliative because of what you say, that it's sedate any worry that the person, the individual may have, and try to guarantee a perpetual state of happiness rather than asking serious questions. Questions which lead to right, wrong, choice, freedom, and other people. So, how would you describe your experience and your knowledge, statistically and otherwise, of what are the best and most splendid outcomes that psychiatry currently claims for itself?
I believe that much better than to read and study all the medical books that have written about psychiatry and psychological problems, one could much better spend his time reading literature and watching drama movies. One particular good movie, which I think shows what I will be saying next, is Girl Interrupted, where you, without too much uncovering the plot, is the girl decides that it is time to grow up, and that it is time that she goes on with life. She actually starts living with the good and the bad, rather than to try and escape reality by trying to act as least adult like as she can. And I think that this shows you the motivation of psychiatric patients, which we all belong to that class, because not I don't believe that it's really a scale, it's really a spectrum, in the sense that none of us are what Diogenes would say an honest man. And all of us tell ourselves stories in order to be able to sleep, to live, to enjoy life at least a little bit more. Because if we really would look at reality the way it is without the story, then often it is not as we would have wanted it to be. And so it happens to all of us, but they're just, I think the patients, what we call them patients, but I mean, I wouldn't want to call them patients, but they are called patients. They just do it more, right? And so they get more out of it, yeah. And the success comes after they discover that there is more to win when they don't do that. But in this culture, you are not burned at the stake. You get free housing, you get free attention, you get a lot of things that you would otherwise not get. So this culture actually is very difficult to work as a good moral guide for these people. I say moral guide because I can't say psychologist or psychiatrist, because then people will think that these people really want to guide you morally. They don't. They you a good guide in this culture cannot. It is very difficult to practice in this culture, because you have to not only convince the patient uh, uh, or make him want to look at himself honestly, which would have been difficult even 2000 years ago. But today you have the culture of mental illness, which they are the victim of, which is of course not true, but they believe it. So it's two difficult things that you have to do instead of one difficult thing. So yeah.
So what you mentioned is very interesting to me, because here in the Netherlands I have come across people who indeed are subsidized by the state. They are dependent on the state for having been certified as suffering some kind of psychiatric disorder. And it seems to me that there is definitely an institutional contradiction, which is there is no incentive for that person to lose their politically based status as, whether it's a victim of society because of trauma and adverse initial conditions in the upbringing, or whether it's the bad genes, because there are also those who attribute everything to nature and genetic components. But there is no incentive for those people to move on with life and take care of the basics of getting a job, getting a place to live, saving, being a good family member, being a good friend, being a good employee, being as excellent as possible, and improving at whatever it is that they do. It seems as though there is indeed an institutional culture that promotes that they are static in a victimized position. And if you look at it from a standpoint of entrepreneurship, I would say that this actually disincentivizes a lot of great social creativity. If you look at the sector of the most influential artists of the past 200 to 300 years, there is clearly a pattern of eccentricity and of extreme uniqueness compared to the time in which they lived. And now these people who are drugged and subsidized to stay in the static, victimized position of mentally ill are actually prevented. I'm not saying that they know it, and I'm not saying necessarily that the institutions know it either, are prevented from creating maybe great works of art, from creating great creative strategies for marketing, from creating all of the weird things that we see from Andy Warhol with a Campbell tomato soup, to Picasso, to Dali, to Van Gogh, which you can look at it artistically, But you can also look at it as technical innovation in the field of commerce, of what is produced for the public. And I think that it is very sad because these persons are, in a sense, being paid not to potentially succeed, but also not to have something to look back and be proud of. And I think that that is very counterproductive.
But I would say that you have to point the finger where there's always you can always say, if there would be better people in power, or if but or if I would have the ring, then I could use it for good. I think that somebody who uses the monetary inflation in order to get a loan for lower interest can be blamed, in a sense that if he does that more than paying taxes because he's working, he has a wage and he pays taxes on that. If he earns more with the interest rate then he pays in taxes, he's a net tax consumer, and so you have to point the finger at some time. But to use this bad system, you cannot really be blamed. You have to. I mean, you can be blamed, but it's like blaming what's the guy called in Lord of the Rings, where he's Boromir. When you can't, you blame Boromir, yes, but he has he we are not angels, and everybody with the ring would be corrupted. And so I think the blame is with the psychiatrist and with the psychologist also. But I think that if we wouldn't have the state system, if we wouldn't have a third payer system, where both the psychiatrist is paid through the state and the patient is financed through the state. You have to point the finger at the state. The state should be dismantled. The ring should be destroyed. And
Yes, this reminds me
that's the
also.
question. Sorry.
This reminds me also of the gospel because of what you mentioned about if you work at an abortion clinic or if you're a hitman or if you're a psychiatrist, which is, from a Christian traditional perspective, God is love. And out of love, he creates the world, and the world is good. But then there is a fallenness of man, and that is original sin. That means that we are imperfect beings who have our own motivations and our own narratives, which may not cohere with reality. And that means that we have to constantly keep ourselves in check while remaining responsible for ourselves, and responsible for ourselves, remembering that we are also surrounded by others. But I find it very interesting, this topic, this point that you bring up, which is that because the medical doctor is subsidized as a psychiatrist, and because the psychiatric patient is subsidized, and you could argue that the same happens with the intermediate pharmacological industries of the prescriptions that are prescribed to these patients, that there is never an incentive to step out of this because it's all paid by some random taxpayer that nobody ever knows. And in the gospel, Christ says, you cannot worship Mammon, the god of money, and God, the God of love or goodness, at the same time. That means that even though we have to live, we have to pay for our roof, our bills, and be responsible, it's not all about maximizing resources at all costs, because this, after all, is how the state finances itself, along with robbers and extortionists and so on. But in aspects that are more sophisticated, like being a psychiatric patient, is not so clear who is getting hurt. Obviously, unless you are familiar with the libertarian theory of taxation is theft and redistribution, you will not know about the absent third person, the third party that is paying for the psychotherapy and your housing and everything. But yes, it seems like there's a rationality trap where there is no loving incentive to promote both responsibility, self knowledge, and stepping away from the victim mentality for these people.
One wonders what the role would be of psychiatry or and psychology, moral guidance in general, in a free society, in a free conviviality. I I do not believe that many people would voluntarily pay for that. I think that um, and it's very difficult to break any habit. Everybody knows this, and then and um, most people that end up in a point where they ask for help have been telling their story to themselves and being strengthened in that view by their environment for so long that it's very difficult to help any of them. Uh, I do psychiatry because I think it is very very interesting to understand people and to try and understand people. But do I really believe that there is something that really would work? I have the least problem with the pharmacological industry. I'm totally not an anti-psychiatrist in that regard. I believe that people that methamphetamines have helped people much more than psychotherapy. I
I,
believe
I, I
that.
remember Thomas Sass, who talked about the fact that you cannot have a one size fits all, and that, of course, if you take seriously what Rothbard and Mises said, then of course this will apply to pharmacology. Whereas some person may find nootropics or creatine, which is used usually by bodybuilders and athletes, turns out to have a cognitive enhancing effect. At least so far, studies have researched if you have sleep deprivation, creatine helps to maintain cognitive performance under sleep deprivation conditions. Whereas another person may have an allergy to creatine. And the right to self medicate was something that the late Thomas Sass was a great advocate of. I think that this overlaps very well with the 14th point of the document that you sent me that I would like you to explain. I'm going to read. In no way is it thus clear that many of the broadly accepted beliefs, supposedly valid for any and all persons, are in actuality applicable to the person consulting you. It thus turns out that this theory of eudaimonia, that is the Greek for happiness, of self-examined living, is both ultimately objective and relative to the subject's constitution, which is in line with metaphysical realism, which is if you're going to live a happy life and is not just going to be conformity to the culture and institutions of your time, it probably is going to be like a custom made suit and not something that you picked up at JC Penney's. There's going to be a unique aspect that is going to be appropriate to your own person. Can you explain that paragraph to me, Dr. Minelli?
Well, I would first want to say that eudaimonia, to say that it's happiness, is of course true, but I would say that it's happiness that is derived from a self-perfecting life, which in order to do you have to self-examine. Um, but um, even though mainstream psychologists and psychiatrists would reject moral objectivism, they all agree that whenever somebody enters the room and acts in this way that is so different, and it's all listed in the DSM, then this or that should change. They are different in that way, so they ought to go to the norm, which is this.
I have to say something about that. The DSM is the Diagnostic Manual Book for Psychiatrists, for those who don't know about it. And yes, I just wanted to make a comment. I think, if I'm not mistaken, that at some point homosexuality was deemed mental illness for the longest time. And then in one later edition of the uh, Diagnostic Manual Book, it simply was taken off after the American Psychiatric Association declared by consensus it is no longer a mental illness. So if you had been diagnosed and you had been told that you were mentally ill as a homosexual, then as soon as the next edition came out, then you were cured, I guess.
Right, exactly. Diagnosis in medicine, because I'm a medical doctor, I've studied medicine. Diagnosis explains the reasons for symptoms. So pathophysiologically, you can show, you can explain why is this patient having these symptoms, and you understand because these cells are malfunctioning, and this results in this, and therefore he is exhibiting these symptoms. But diagnosing, you can't use that word. I think it's ridiculous. And why is it ridiculous? Because diagnosing in psychiatry does not explain any symptoms. It is a tautology of the symptoms. It's synonymous with the symptoms. So, what is a depression? A depression is you're feeling sad or you cannot feel happy. Yeah, but I mean, why? Why are you feeling sad? There's no explanation, and then they're pointing to serotonin and etc., which is not included in the diagnostical manual. It's not one of the characteristics. It doesn't say your serotonin is below this level. That is not what it says. And it was, I think, in 2022 with a study of 60,000 patients, it was completely debunked. They couldn't, at least it's debunked in the sense that they couldn't show it. Um, and so diagnosis is a fancy word in order. It's another story which persons psychiatrists tell themselves to uplift their moral status for themselves. They now can live better, they can sleep better. They're real doctors. They're not real doctors. I don't have pretension to be a real doctor. I'm a real doctor when I listen to your heart, I listen to your lungs, I whatever. But I don't pretend to be a real doctor. I don't feel that my life improves, or I'm morally excelling when I'm a medical doctor, when people come to me with moral problems. I think
I
they
think that
do.
I think that this is interesting because I remember watching an interview with Thomas Ass where he said he was asked, "Well, you are against the involuntary aspect of psychiatry, locking people in cages when they are deemed a harm to the public, even though they've broken no law, and you are against also forcing people to take medical treatments or interventions that are not voluntary, that they didn't agree to, and you're against the concept of mental illness as a construct. How do you practice as a psychiatrist? They asked him. And he said, well, my clients, if you want to call them that, they call me and they tell me, I want to talk to you. Can I come? And then I check my agenda and then I tell them, yes, you can come. And I listen to them. I ask questions and they pay me. I pay attention and I try to the best of my ability to listen and understand what they're telling me. It seems to me that that has a very humble approach to understanding psychiatric practice, which is trying to improve understanding and listening of someone who seems to be eager. I mean, from an economics transaction standpoint, they have a demonstrated preference whenever they themselves are the ones paying for their psychiatric therapist in being listened. But then, of course, if you're listening to someone and they are deeply concerned about aspects of themselves and their own emotions and experience of reality, it seems to me very insincere, very dishonest, and not accidental whenever someone then avoids the question of right and wrong, free will. What is the good life? What is the good life that I should ask myself best fits my characteristics and so on? It seems to me that the answer of Thomas Sass was I listen to people and they pay me for listening and asking questions. But what you're saying is that for that to be effective, you have to address topics that it seems to me from what you have reported are altogether taboo in psychiatrical practice.
They are taboo everywhere in scientific circles, even in the scientific circles of ethical philosophy, moral philosophy, where they study what is, but they don't study what ought, because what ought is it's fiction. So even in philosophy, there nobody dares to go that far. But I think that one cannot escape it. I think I tried to show it in the beginning of our talk. But I feel also that maybe I've spoken too negative, or I wouldn't want this interview to to I wouldn't want to come across as being negative towards these people who are asking for help, um,
So,
with their
if I
moral
understand
problem.
correctly, you are criticizing the technical aspect of a practice from a professional manner, being informed by your own experience and available literature, which I invite everybody to read the works of Thomas Sass, but that this should not be taken defensively or as an attack against the practitioners themselves, that it is rather to say, in the way that we libertarians are not terrorists, we say the price mechanism can account for charity, dispute resolution, and security. And being that that is the case, why not abolish criminally punishing failure to surrender your money in taxes so that there can be a dialogue towards a more consensual state of affairs rather than something that seems to be very frustrating and not going anywhere right now? Because I would like to hear, in your opinion, in your sincere opinion, what do you think is the most positive and non defensive, not feeling personally under attack perspective that a psychiatric practitioner could derive from the opinions that you have shared with us today?
But I didn't mean that. I actually wanted to show positive light on the patients. I actually am criticizing the psychologists and psychiatrists, and I do feel that they are all personally responsible, and they ought to, if they are what their profession claims they are doing, then they ought to feel ashamed, and we all ought to ostracize them from our convivial orders. I wouldn't want to have them over for dinner. Um, but I think that the patients are to be lauded for their um, love of life. I when I speak to my patients, I see a more honest stance towards life, even if in other ways they are much better liars to themselves. They in other ways they are much more honest. And then many people who thrive in this society, uh, uh, I believe that there is much more. Yeah, if you call these things illness, and I would, and I of course reject that, but if I would go along with that, you would have to say homosexuality is an illness, and you would have to say that all of these people who go who thrive in this society, not in every way, because they're still good entrepreneurs, they're still good people, and most day-to-day interactions with people is on a voluntary basis, and in that regard they are not really that bad. But many who thrive under conditions that prevail today in society, like for instance education, um, getting and holding a professorship. You have to. You can't say the truth. You have to say lies. If you don't, if I would call my male patient him, but but he thinks it's a she, yes, that I'm cancelled. I lose my job, and so you have to. I can't. I don't want this interview to show that I'm negative towards towards the patient. I think that if I'm very defenseless, let's say physically, and I want to learn karate, and I go to somebody with with this with this weakness of mine, of course you can say, oh, morally there's so much to blame, because he could have, you're already 30 years old, you could have you could have been a lot stronger if you would have worked towards being more strong. But that is not really, that is not the worst thing. The worst thing would be if the karate teacher would actually not be a good karate teacher. He couldn't do karate at all, but he would do, it would be a ballet dancer instead. That would be terrible. And so I think psychiatrists and psychologists are much more to blame for keeping, like the witch hunters, keep the idea of witches alive. If there wouldn't
So what
be
you're
any
saying,
psychiatrists and there wouldn't be any psychologists, then
so,
it would be clear that there is no such thing as mental illness.
so what you're saying is that the so-called patients get the short end of the stick, and the so-called practitioners get the social status and income, and that this is most harming to the so-called patients on something that may potentially be without true scientific grounding, if I'm not mistaking you.
Sorry, I didn't follow that.
So if I understand correctly, the patients are the victims, and the practitioners get both the money and the status. And if I understand correctly, you told me that some of the people who you have spoken to as so-called patients have admirable qualities. I am reminded of a late comedian from the United States, George Carlin, who said there are great benefits to getting old. For example, when you are at Thanksgiving dinner, you can sit and look at everyone around the table and say, "Who are you people and where is my horse?" And then they start paying attention a lot more closely to you. And I remember the boxer Cassius Clay, later Muhammad Ali, who said that he had to act as though he was insane, supposedly crazy, to be able to truly intimidate his opponents before going into the ring. So obviously, the
Exactly.
history of
This, this is the point. In a free world, there would still be people trying to intimidate others by acting crazy, or to get their attention, like the old guy acting as if he was senile. But the blame then also for a great, for, I mean, I would say that it is immoral to do so, right? In most cases, unless you want to get away from an evil, even more immoral person like a thief or a robber or whatever. If you then try to intimidate him by acting crazy, then you can say whatever you're doing, that is okay. Um, but to do it with friends and family, um, um, then the blame also lies with those who buy into that, because I think that who often the patients are, not always, but often they are less intelligent than the psychiatrist. Yes, they often are less educated than a psychiatrist, and so then you have to ask yourself who ought to help who. Is it the adult helping the child, or is it the child helping the adult? Is it the psychiatrist helping the patient, or the patient? And and so yeah, you can't escape that. You cannot escape it, and it should take responsibility for in facilitating this delusion.
It seems to me that that is the core issue, which is in enabling manipulation, it seems that the parties involved engage in a convenient lie and they may profit, but the truth suffers most.
Yeah.
Now, just to finish up, anyone who would like to go to the famous hotel, the Notary in Bruges, can go to their brand new website and book a room. If you use the bonus code Why Ortiz Kill, that is WHYORTIZKILL, you will get a discount. And also, I have to say that I've known Dr. Minelli for several years. And as friends, in many occasions, I have asked for his advice. I have shared my insights and experiences of day to day life and reality. And I can say that he is one of the best listeners, but he is frank when it comes to putting the finger in the wound and asking what is the truth of the matter here. And so I don't necessarily just recommend that people go to his hotel to stay. I think that he is a person worth knowing and worth speaking to. Of course, he is younger than I am, but many times I have found his perspective to be fresh and distinct enough that where I would have blinders because of a cognitive bias or frame directed towards a specific end, he definitely helped me looking at it or approaching it from a different angle. And I think that this is one of those aspects that true friendship or honest conversation is vastly superior and outperforms therapy in general. I don't know. What is your position?
Yes, I agree with this 100%. And I think it applies to all persons. And this is the key point for Thomas Sass, is like you have said, everything should be on a voluntary basis. Uh, when we're talking about persons, they have all rights. You cannot have a couple of rights. They're talking about patient rights. There's no such thing. You either have the rights of a person or you do not have any rights. This is my opinion. I know that we differ on some things like children and but I believe that you and there is always the problem of when the limit, not the limit, the border, right? A person getting senile, when does he still have rights? When doesn't he have rights anymore? It's very difficult, um, but it is very important that all of these people, all of them, should be treated as if they still have rights, because you cannot show mental illness. It's no such thing. You cannot show witchcraft. You cannot prove it. It doesn't exist. And so somebody acting crazy to like you said in the beginning, to get away from capital punishment or anything like that, or any punishment, or somebody who might be uh, who might not have any rights, who is not who doesn't have he's not I know it in Dutch, doesn't matter.
There's a saying in law. It used to be the case. Interdiction is in Spanish. When you were declared insane, and by virtue of being declared insane, this has since been modified in Costa Rica anyway. It used to be the case that you were not allowed to close contracts, to sign, to be a signatory in a contract.
Yeah.
And that could be declared by a judge. At the discretion of a judge, suddenly you could not engage in business anymore.
Yeah, and we have to reject this at all costs. There is never a reason why a true conversation could not take place. And if it's very clear, if somebody really acts in a way that is counter to argumentation, he ignores you, he does whatever he wants to do, he doesn't stop when you ask him to, if it's on your property or anything, you can treat him as if you have to do you have to be proportional, right? Because he might have rights, he might be just acting, right? But you can still defend yourself. There's no reason why you couldn't defend yourself. And even if he was crazy and he wouldn't have rights, then why not? Then you can certainly defend yourself, because look at the case of a wild dog coming into your garden. You can defend yourself against that too, and he certainly, and that dog that certainly doesn't have rights. So in any case, you can defend yourself. So I
This
don't
is a ver-
understand any good reason to ever treat any other person as if he didn't have rights.
yes, this is a very important universalist aspect of the framework of human rights, because then it leads back to the pre-Humean conception of you cannot derive an ought from an is, which was the classical and traditional conception, which is all of mankind have rights by virtue of their nature. And as you say, if you are walking around and there's a wolf and the wolf attacks you, you definitely can defend yourself to preserve your life. So I completely agree with you that unfortunately we live in a time in which the concept of rights is too much of a politically established regional, cultural, historicist phenomena, and not a recognition of I am speaking to another person like myself.
Yeah. I I I don't know if there's anything that we missed.
I think that from what I read here, reading all 16 points of the text you sent me, by the way, I would like to know if I can put that text on the description below.
Yeah.
And and having said that, thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for your donations, subscriptions, liking, subscribing, walking around telling people watch Tankenberg News, and so on. And that was this, I believe, third episode of No Free Dinner Either. Thank you very much for your time and attention, and thank you to Dr. Minelli in Belgium.
Thank you for having me. See you soon.